September 16, 1931, a story of betrayal that took place in the heart of Detroit, reveals one of the Purple Gang's darkest days. When Eddie Fletcher, one of the gang's most cold-blooded gunmen, received orders to target his own friends, what did he feel? This drama lived on the thin line between loyalty and betrayal would once again reveal the ruthless face of organized crime.
My name is Eddie Fletcher, and today I am living the heaviest day of my life. Standing in front of the gray walls of Collingwood Manor apartment on Detroit's cold September morning, I am trying to hide the storm inside me. I have been working as a gunman for the Purple Gang for 10 years, but today is different. Today I will shed the blood of my own friends. In my pocket, I feel like I can hear Irving Milberg's cold voice. I keep remembering the orders he gave me last night in the old warehouse by the Detroit River. The ice-cold look in Milberg's eyes reflected the weight of being the leader of the Purple Gang. He had said that Abe Axler and his friends had betrayed the gang, that they had made deals with rival gangs. I would not dare to question whether these accusations were true. In the Purple Gang, asking questions meant digging your own grave. The gloomy atmosphere of Detroit in 1931 had penetrated every corner of the city, while people writhing in the grip of the Great Depression wandered the streets hopelessly. We Purple Gang members were still making millions from illegal alcohol trade. Collingwood Manor was a luxury apartment complex where Detroit's upper class lived. Shiny marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and mahogany doors proclaimed the wealth of this place. But today, this beauty would mix with the smell of blood and betrayal. In the early hours of the morning, when the sun was just beginning to filter through Detroit's gray clouds, I climbed to the third floor of the apartment. The corridors were silent. Only the creaking of old wooden floors could be heard. I had known Abe Axler for years. We grew up together in Detroit's Hastings Street neighborhood. I remembered how he always wore his hat slightly to one side, how he constantly moved his hands when talking. Now I was here to kill him. As I approached the door of apartment 37, I could hear Abe's voice inside. The smell of coffee wafted into the corridor. This smell took me back to my mother's kitchen in my childhood days. It seemed like a normal morning, but I knew this would be his last morning. The cold metal of my Smith & Wesson pistol in my pocket created a familiar feeling between my fingers. This weapon had brought the end of dozens of people on Detroit streets. With every trigger pull, I would remember the warmth of that metal. One more would be added to the list today. Standing in the corridor, the years I spent with Abe passed through my mind like a film strip. When we first met in 1922, we were both in our early 20s. We had grown up in Detroit's Hastings Street, in the Jewish neighborhoods. Back then, the Purple Gang was still a small gang group. We only did neighborhood bullying. There was a different light in Abe's eyes in those days, like a young man who had expectations from life. Now that light would go out, and by my hand. The paintings hanging on the apartment walls reflected the taste of Detroit's wealthy class. Impressionist paintings, bronze sculptures, and antique vases showed how luxurious this place was. Abe's choice to live here was like a sign of the money he made from the Purple Gang, but at the same time, it was also a sign of how far he had distanced himself from the gang. Gang members living in places like Collingwood Manor usually tended to break away from the gang. This situation had not escaped the attention of Irving Milberg and other leaders. When I knocked on the door, I heard Abe's footsteps. I knew his walk. He limped a little, because he had been shot in the leg 5 years ago, in a clash with a rival gang. When he opened the door, there was a smile on his face, but the dark circles under his eyes indicated his sleeplessness. The recent tensions within the Purple Gang had affected him too. He seemed surprised to see me, but invited me in. When he put his hand on my shoulder, I felt them tremble. Maybe his instincts were making him sense the approaching danger. The apartment interior was filled with luxurious furniture. Velvet armchairs imported from France, coffee tables made of Italian marble, crystal glasses and silver-framed mirrors decorated every corner. These items were like a sign of the money Abe had earned from the Purple Gang. But at the same time, it was also a sign of how far he had distanced himself from the gang. From the window, Detroit River could be seen. The river sparkled like silver in the early morning light. Canadian territory stretched across the opposite shore, the place where illegal alcohol shipments came from. This view reminded me of the source of the Purple Gang's power. On Abe's wall cabinet, there were photographs from the past. Happy moments of Purple Gang members, gang meetings and pictures taken at Detroit's famous clubs. I was also in these photographs, smiling with my young face. None of us could have predicted that these days would come back then. One photograph particularly caught my attention. It was taken in 1925. Abe, me and 3 friends we had now killed stood together. There was hope on all our faces, as if we believed the world belonged to us. Abe began to tell about the old days, while offering me coffee. I noticed his hands trembling as he held the cup. He reminded me of our childhood days on Hastings Street, our first robbery and how we joined the Purple Gang. He told about how Detroit changed in the 1920s, the opportunities that Prohibition brought to the city, and how the Purple Gang grew stronger. There was nostalgia in his voice, as if he was trying to hold on to the beauties of the past. His eyes sparkled as he described the atmosphere of Detroit in those days. While talking about speakeasy clubs, secret alcohol shipments, and the gang's first big heists, pride could be sensed in his tone. I felt the weight of the gun in my pocket. Every word of Abe's deepened the pain in my heart. Listening to his innocent childhood memories, while remembering that I was about to kill him, was like torture. He told about how we were like a family in the early days of the Purple Gang. Back then we really protected each other. No one betrayed anyone. But as the years passed, the ambition for money and power had destroyed these family bonds. There was longing for Detroit's old days in Abe's voice. In 1925, the Purple Gang was not yet fully organized. We operated as small neighborhood gangs. Abe described those times as a golden age. There was no pressure from federal agents yet. Police forces were not organized enough, and rival gangs were not this strong. We could walk freely on Detroit's streets. We could do our business without accounting to anyone. At around 9 o'clock, the door was knocked again. I knew Irving Milberg's men had arrived. This was the plan. While I kept Abe busy inside, the others would wait outside. When Abe was about to go to the door, he stopped. A sudden fear appeared in his eyes, as if he sensed that something was not right. After living on Detroit's streets for so many years, people develop the ability to sense danger. At that moment, I had to act. When I drew my gun, I will never forget the expression on Abe's face. At first he could not understand what was happening, as if this was a joke. Then, fear appeared in his eyes, followed by deep disappointment. His facial expression was a mixture of astonishment, anger, and deep sadness. He asked me why I was doing it. His voice was trembling. When he mentioned Irving Milberg's name, I saw from his eyes that he understood everything. The leader of the Purple Gang had accused him of treason, and I had to carry out this order. Abe pleaded with me, with one last hope at that moment. He reminded me of our childhood friendship, the years we spent together. He tried to prove his loyalty to the Purple Gang, said he had never betrayed. But in the Purple Gang, orders were not questioned, they were only executed. Irving Milberg's decisions were absolute, and opposing him meant signing my own death warrant. I watched the last light of hope in Abe's eyes fade. He had realized there was no escape now. When I pulled the trigger, only one sound was heard in Detroit's noisy morning. That sound is still ringing in my ears. The gunshot echoing between the apartment's luxurious walls was like the beginning of the end of the Purple Gang. As Abe's body fell to the ground, the coffee in his cup spilled onto the carpet and mixed with blood. This scene seemed to symbolize the sharp line between the Purple Gang's past and future. When Abe's body fell on the luxurious carpet, the red liquid began to spread next to the crystal glass. The morning light coming through the window illuminated this terrible scene. At that moment, I understood the ruthlessness of the Purple Gang, how fragile loyalty was. I had killed a friend with whom I had worked together for years, with whom I had laughed together. As I left the apartment, there was no one in the corridors. Detroit's morning calm continued, as if nothing had happened. But I knew that this incident would be the beginning of the end of the Purple Gang. Federal agents had been after us for a long time, and this murder would give them the excuse they needed. I later learned Detective James McCarty's name. He was one of the most experienced detectives of the Detroit Police Department and had made a name for himself in the fight against organized crime. This Irish origin man had been serving on Detroit streets for 20 years. When he examined the crime scene at Collingwood Manor, he had no difficulty tracking the Purple Gang's traces. McCarty's sharp eyes did not miss even the smallest details in the apartment. He had determined the blood traces around Abe's body, the angle at which the weapon was used, and how the killer entered and left the apartment within minutes. The details reported by McCarty showed how organized the Purple Gang was. The murder had been professionally planned and executed. How Abe's apartment was entered, how the weapon was used, and how the killer escaped reflected the gang's years of experience. McCarty had immediately understood that this murder was part of the internal settling of accounts within the Purple Gang. As such murders increased in Detroit, he had realized that the gang's power was shaken. The arrival of federal agents to Detroit accelerated after this murder. The special team from Washington began planning a comprehensive operation against the Purple Gang. The evidence collected by McCarty was very valuable for federal agents. The murder at Collingwood Manor had been one of the main reasons for the Purple Gang to be taken under federal surveillance. As the days passed, operations against the Purple Gang increased on Detroit streets. Federal agents began to appear at every street corner. Irving Milberg and other leaders became increasingly paranoid. The incident at Collingwood Manor had been done to show the gang's power, but it had become a sign of weakness instead. How could a gang that could not trust its own men survive? The United States in 1931 was one of the last years of the Prohibition era. Illegal alcohol trade was still profitable, but the federal government's pressure was increasing day by day. Al Capone's arrest for tax evasion in Chicago was a warning to all gangs. Gang leaders like Lucky Luciano in New York, Mickey Duffy in Philadelphia, and Tom Pendergast in Kansas City had been placed under federal surveillance. The Purple Gang was also aware of this change, but was late in adapting. Detroit's industrial structure provided an ideal environment for the Purple Gang's activities. This city, which was the center of giant companies like Ford Motor Company and General Motors, was a place where the working class was concentrated. During the Prohibition era, these workers increased the demand for illegal alcohol. The Purple Gang made millions by smuggling alcohol from Canada over the Detroit River. But Abe's death was a sign that this golden age was over. The gang's operation reflected typical American gang structuring. There was a hierarchical order. Leaders gave orders and lower ranks executed these orders without question. While this system ensured the gang maintained its power, it also fueled paranoia and distrust. Abe's death was the most striking example of how ruthless this system could be. In the weeks following Abe Axler's death, trust within the gang was completely shaken. Everyone began to suspect everyone. On Detroit's cold autumn nights, Purple Gang members took care not to wander alone. Fear had penetrated every member of the gang. For me, this incident was the beginning of my break from the Purple Gang. Nothing was the same after I killed Abe. I could not sleep at night. I would see his last look in my dreams. I would walk for hours on the shores of Detroit River, questioning the past. I had shown loyalty to the Purple Gang, but at what cost? As federal agents' operations intensified, gang members began to be caught, one by one. Irving Milberg and other leaders were sent to high-security prisons like Alcatraz. The golden age of the Purple Gang was over. Their name was no longer feared on Detroit's streets.
The Collingwood Manor Massacre went down in history as one of the symbolic moments of the Purple Gang's collapse. This incident showed how ruthless organized crime could be not only to its enemies, but also to elements within itself. The internal conflict experienced by Abe Fletcher was quite important in terms of reflecting the spiritual state of gang members of the period. America's Prohibition era was thus remembered once again with a bloody internal reckoning.